Okay, thanks, Marty. I'm Ross Weiner. I'm head of Gemsco Capital. Gemsco Capital basically is my own investment and advisory vehicle. We run a small family office. We work with a couple of larger family offices on investments. We're primarily focused on two areas: real estate. Some of you have seen me up here before talking about real estate, and public and private market investing. And Marty has set me up once again to, in this case, talk about frontier tech and deep tech, which are a little bit outside of my areas of expertise. And that was a great masterclass that Darwin just put on. So looking forward to getting into some granularity away from AI.
And we've got about 30 minutes.
Okay,
so it's going to be short.
Great.
Andy can introduce himself, maybe. Andy?
Yeah, Andy. We've done go ahead. Tell us who you are and what you're doing.
Sorry, I have the flu. I didn't want to affect an entire conference. I am only in Connecticut. This is my 40th year as a professional investor. You can cut me in half as a venture tech investor and hedge fund. I ran hedge funds and invested in hedge funds. So actually, this is strange. I would have done it in the room. Darwin, you look a lot like a guy I knew named Daniel Ling. Any relation?
He's my brother.
So
He's my brother. In LA, right? He lives in LA.
He lived in Hong Kong and LA, yes.
Yeah. I'm from Hong Kong, so.
So it's been a while, but I knew him very, very well. He only knows me mostly from hedge funds because for the first 20 years, I invested privately and I ran 3 VC funds. So what I want to talk about a bit here, which will, I think, help the audience understand a little more where Darwin's the source of what Darwin was talking about. And I see he's also connected to biotech, medtech, and I've invested in all of those things. But the one place I'll leave my intro is that I had to write my own trading software. So that got me investing in tech. NVIDIA was founded in 1993. I was the anchor investor in a company that invented something called DPV lithography, which changed the way chips are made, which is now extremely lithography, which is part of the chip wars. And I also know his father because I spent a lot of time investing in Asia and China later in my career. So I'd like to talk about some of the basis of what he's talking about, because I think he'll help you understand how we have these forks in the road when it comes to deep tech, whether it's AI and applied to drug discovery, or it's everybody's into large language models, but as Darwin pointed out, there's small language models that can be applied to all kinds of things, robotics and other stuff. So that's my sort of spread out info in terms of my bio. Otherwise, it'll take too long.
I don't know if you want to add anything to your bio or just refresh it. We just heard it. I wanted to ask the audience, how many people are familiar with the terms frontier tech or deep tech? Are you familiar with it? Heard of it before? Not that many. So that's a little bit of context. It was a new term, frankly, to me. And where did I go to help educate me? I went to AI, of course. So, basically, without getting into too much detail, the idea behind frontier tech and deep tech is, getting around, kind of new and cutting edge technologies that push the envelope of innovation. A lot of groundbreaking ideas. We've touched on some. AI is just one of it. Quantum computing, robotics, space, things like that. So real, cutting edge stuff, and not like the iPhone 17 ones that come out. So a little bit different there.
So can I start, because I think it'll, and then Darwin, maybe you can just pick up from this. I want to talk a little bit about the difference in training AIs versus using AIs. And I think he already went into DeepSeek and all of that. I think people are missing a couple of things that will help understand the whole picture when we talk. The first thing is AI is not a computer program you write and then you're done and you got a computer program. It requires training. And I don't know how many times you're on ChatGPT, whatever. The first one was trained on $10 billion worth of NVIDIA boards that Microsoft bought OpenAI. And that's, they just use the whole internet as their database. So here's something that you have to understand is that these things need to be trained over and over and over and over again. Unlike you typing into DeepSeek or chat a question and getting an immediate answer, training is something that can take a short time, a long time, but it's repetitive. Things are trained 10, 20, 30 times before they're even usable. So the training part of it, and they might have done it with $6 million because there's no real-time response required in training an AI. It can sit there and run and run and run for days before you get it, you're trained, and then you have to retrain it. Could take hours, could take days, could take weeks. You obviously don't want to take years. So the computing power relative to the training speed is directly applicable. But if you don't have that much computing power, you can simply take longer to train whatever it is that you want to train on whatever data that you have. So that part is important to understand because that means the ability to train AIs is much more open to other use cases and budgets than one might think just reading the headlines. And as I said, NVIDIA was founded in 1993. And it's evolved into its ups and downs. And I even traded the company for a long time. So one of the things is that although Moore's law is not dead, but it may not be directly applicable, but it's applicable to this, which is that the semiconductor industry, something I said I've been involved in since the mid-90s, will continue to produce cheaper computing power, enabling more and more people to train AIs, use AIs potentially, but certainly train them. And the other thing, if you just look at your phone and your laptop, is the semiconductor industry has consistently made chips that use less power, generate less heat, and produce more computing power. And there's no reason that that won't continue as well. So although the power usage of AI is an issue, there's going to be mitigating factors in the advance of semiconductor technology. So I wanted to start with the training concept. I don't know if, Darwin, you have anything to add to that.
So let me kind of go back. So you have a first question about frontier tech. What was that like, how do we see that? That's the first question, right?
Right.
Okay. So, and then I think you talk about the second question is like, what is the interesting opportunity that we see from our end here, or what?
Yeah, certainly going beyond AI to see what other opportunities you see is relevant in this space.
Okay. So that's, I think let's go, the first question is that frontier tech, deep tech, yes, this is something where the way you kind of hear it is like, it's so out there. So, and it seems to a lot of us may be irrelevant, or maybe it's like, is this something, that I need to care about now? So as an investor, so I think I kind of double down on our name and the mission. We call ourselves the good AI capital. And then the good really is like, you have a purpose, you have the meaning. It's not about just, I want to find next, quantum computing resources, but what is it for? Why do I care? Why do I need that, right? So for quantum computing itself, one of the kind of main advantages is that you can actually allow that to do drug discovery. So you might have heard of, things where, like just even using AI for drug discovery right now, but they're using the traditional methods still to build an AI model, try to locate a potential assets, to do small molecule development, do the all that. So that's an inefficient way. It's not an inefficient, it's just probably the current being bound by the current available technology. So in quantum computing itself, if you can apply that towards this massively parallel kind of like different state, different thing, the idea is that you can speed up that, the outcome potentially, you can have speed up that delivery maybe from 10 years back to 2 years, if you can actually kind of discovery. So this is how we want to look at, deep tech and frontier tech. We're not interested in, say, going to Mars just for going to Mars, because what does it benefit the humanity? How does it apply to our daily lives? Not like, so that's kind of our kind of lens when we look at how deep tech is. So that's why I talk about that, we tend to look at how AI being applied towards different industry and how AI is used to solve these problems. Because right now we are in a kind of environment that we have a lot of problems that, basically is because of how our human workforce are trained to do in the last 50 years. And, if there's something that actually changed potentially that can disrupt that, I think this is something where we're very interested in doing that. So that's kind of like the first question in terms of frontier tech and deep tech here. The second part is that how do we kind of look at the specific opportunity in AI here? So I guess Andrew mentioned that, this training. So one thing that I didn't talk about in my last presentation is that actually in the earnings report in NVIDIA last week. So obviously the general market has a lot of concern right now. I'm sure everybody know not only NVIDIA is like the Max 7, the Magnificent 7, the entire S&P market is, concentrated by these 7 companies that own 30% of S&P. So any single thing that NVIDIA suffer and all that, it takes the entire S&P down, So, and obviously in the last week or so, we experienced that, with tariffs and everything going on. So I tend not to look at my stock screen, so because it's always like crazy stuff happening. So one thing that says, yes, I think talk about the pre-training, which is, typically, the training part is where we actually consume a lot of these NVIDIA chips. And that's a day where we have to do the pre-training. Basically, how do we build up the large language model using ChatGPT, so the transformer architecture. One of the gentlemen talked about that, right? So that's in I would say, the last phase. But because of the reasoning capabilities and the reinforcement learning capability that I mentioned, now that actually is open up this kind of like opportunity to consumption of the NVIDIA chips or the AI chips per se. So one thing that Jensen Huang, when he discussed on the kind of the CNBC response, is that, yeah, DeepSeek is happening. He didn't kind of trash talk DeepSeek. He actually said DeepSeek is real. DeepSeek is happening. But he actually goes on to say this enable a new area of innovation of the reasoning capability or reinforcement learning. Because on that front, they said, yes, they need to steal more Blackwell chips. We're using that for that. So don't worry, market. Our market is not slowing down. Our market is still growing because of this thing called reasoning. So that's his response. And I think that's true because now everybody's going to double down on that. It's not only just, DeepSeek is doing that, Anthropic, which is in the large language model, as well as the, the OpenAI, they're all kind of building towards that. And a bunch of startups are doing that too. So that actually enabled that, they still need to buy the NVIDIA chips and all that. It's not like a heavy data center kind of training process. So that's a good news here by itself. But what is that kind of market going out, like 1 year, 2 year, we don't know. Of course, now it's like, I think this is still, the market is still jittery. And the third area that I will talk about, also I mentioned that in our last presentation, is that this thing called inference. So inference basically is like just creating the output or creating the outcome, right? And that in itself, people don't like think about like, you don't really need a whole lot, but actually that does need a whole lot. And especially with the kind of like more power consumption, and all that stuff that we talk about, when you look at how DeepSeek kind of create the results, they would just say, go through a bunch of reasoning, go through a bunch of like, thinking out loud and all that. Every single that thinking out loud stuff is going for this inference compute. And what that means is that there's more demand for the NVIDIA chips also. But I will also kind of resonate with Andrew's point. Is like, yeah, NVIDIA is not the only game in town. There's a lot of new chips, even real semiconductor companies that play in that space right now. There's a couple of startups that are in that space. That actually is a good opportunity. Now with more competitors in the space here, with open source, everybody get access to it. I think the ecosystem of the market is going to expand. As an entrepreneur, as a founder, we just say, it's not about just I'm doing the best on my little own island and I'm going to conquer the entire market. Because as we learned, this doesn't work. You have to have kind of like collaborative, like ecosystem that foster innovation, because you have to learn from each other. It's not about just I have the best IP in the world and all that. The best innovation comes with collaboration, and that's actually something we felt very excited about.
So can I add to the frontier question? Let's continue where Darwin was talking. So the frontier isn't necessarily just DeepSeek, because DeepSeek was created on a budget. That's great, and a lot of things can be done that way. But Darwin already alluded to, for instance, drug discovery. Astronomers have done amazing things. Biologists are doing amazing things. And an example I'll use, which is now a dozen years old, everything is not a large language model. Inference, by the way, is and takes a lot more computing power than simply a linear answer from ChatGPT does. It takes a lot more training to be able to make inferences than it does simply to recover information and sequence it in the right answer. So, but let's talk about things that are not large language models just for a minute, because that's where a lot of deep tech is really going. Whether it's robotics, quantum has a role. I'll mention that at the end because there aren't functioning quantum computers in the market yet. But here, so let's go back a decade. IBM Watson was at the time one of the only computers capable of really training an AI. IBM took 10,000 mammograms. I want to do something anybody can understand. Took 10,000 mammograms and trained them to identify which mammograms should be focused on, just the way a radiologist does. It was 77% accurate. They gave the same 10,000 to radiologists, who it turns out are slightly less than 77% accurate. And IBM continued to improve that, and actually, I think, sold the business. So here's an example, a simple one, where large language models have absolutely nothing to do with it. This is image understanding images and understanding it in terms of data and finding the outlier. So in terms of other uses, take that analogy into robotics, take it into drug discovery, take it into areas such as other types of med tech, surgery. If you take, that's imaging too. And all of these areas are being advanced by artificial intelligence. And that was something, a cousin of large language models is machine learning. It's also artificial intelligence. So as Darwin pointed out, right now, just training AIs on 10,000 molecules for drug discovery is too simplistic, but we're getting better and better and better at that every day. Astronomers have taken decades worth of data that they've collected and found out all kinds of things because it's just too much data. The opposite of that, the small language model concept, are companies that have lots of data already. Let's say a Japanese robotics company that's been doing this for decades. Japanese are not known for creating great software, by the way. I spent a lot of time investing in Japan. They create great hardware. So how do we take that great hardware and advance its use, adding AI to the software component? Just imagine the capabilities that can be done. That would be the equivalent of a small language model. We don't care about anything but the robotics, right? We don't care anything about the drug discovery data if we're trying to cure breast cancer. We don't care about anything except for certain types of surgery, if that's what we're trying to apply it to. So the frontier tech is now expanding into areas that just aren't headlines on your television set.
And,
So I have-
Andy and Darwin, just wanted to,
Hey, Ross, I had a question.
okay, sure, Marty.
So I just wanted to say, so we talked about the constraints of the United States on these NVIDIA chips into China, et cetera. People don't realize that rubber originally came from South America, and it was stolen from the Amazon forest by British spies. And then once they stole hundreds of these seeds for rubber plants, they then took it to India and the Philippines, where rubber grew like crazy, right? So it's a natural course of things that intellectual property gets stolen. But I think just like that, this Columbian era brought us to great innovation. The same thing is happening with space and robotics. I'm not sure if you guys are looking at that or what you're seeing. I mean, you can't have really robots building moon bases without AI as well, right? So can you guys give your thoughts on that?
Marty, can I say one comment on the China thing? Because I've both invested in the technology and I spent a lot of time in China. So it's a misnomer to think that the Chinese chip manufacturing is backwards and incapable of producing good chips. That's not true. They have had deep UV lithography for decades. It's only the latest, most extreme levels of chip manufacturing that are now being held back, whatever the excuse is, military, you call it whatever you want, but they are not incapable of producing very, very competent, powerful chips that are capable of AI, just not the latest model of what NVIDIA is, an H100 board.
And I actually have a factoid around that, which
Sure,
is
go
that
ahead, please.
there was a global group that had, talked about 157 pivotal technologies, and in 2000, the United States had the lead in the overwhelming majority of them, something like 140 of them, and today China has a lead on about 140 of them. About the only thing that U.S. still has a lead on is chip technology, and it's negligible, as you just mentioned. And maybe 10 other core technologies. So
I can respond on the robotics question.
You respond first.
Okay.
No, please, let's go, let's move on. I just want to make a comment.
I ask you a question? Oh, okay.
You
go.
okay, so I think you asked about moon, space and robotics. So we don't invest in space. So that's kind of put that out first. But we do invest in robotics. And this is not as frontier tech or, that people like to. It is actually happening right now. I mean, I mentioned that one of the company, we just went IPO, have a great exit of the company, has a great applications. So AI is kind of the infrastructure that is the foundational technology that allows robots to be intelligent. So if you look at the robots, kind of like the last century or the last 10 years before AI, it's very what we call the programmable AI. See a robotic arm that trying to move things from point A to point B. And behind that is just like programming, right? So it's a lot of conditional that the programmers have to program is that if the robots encounter a sort of kind of friction or somebody try to hit you, then just okay, try to avoid this and all that. So, and you can see that that's not a very scalable kind of applications because, there's many conditions. So in the last kind of 20 years, manufacturing, the robotic arm is very fixed. It does one thing only and one thing that's only good at, and that's all they care, at that point. But with the new kind of emerging kind of landscape for robotics, so I think, you see all this humanoid robots that are coming out from Tesla and all that. So the idea behind it is that it looks like human, it's trying to do some human tasks and all that looks cool. They serve you a martini if you want. But the idea behind it is I think is using the same kind of tokenization model that OpenAI or the new generative AI kind of trend is using. So ChatGPT, as we all know, you type a bunch of text, and then just kind of give you some results, and that's what the token, the input token and an output token. So in this case here, a robot can tokenize actions. So what does that mean? So if you're just trying to say, you remember there's a learning piece, right? So a robot or that machinery need to learn. So imagine you're in a warehouse, you're trying to move like some pallets from point A to point B in a warehouse. Then how do you kind of navigate sort of like the terrain, if you will, if you something that falls in front of the robot? How do you kind of avoid it? And if somebody start hitting you, the robot company that I mentioned is on the street, people start hitting the robot, how to defend yourself and all that stuff, right? So these are like intelligent kind of like things. And in a way, how do they do that? They actually build up the intelligence system by learning. So we talk about the action. So basically, by training the robot to say, these are the actions. So instead of telling the robot, say, hey, move from point A, well, we tell the robot move from point A to point B. But in between, there's so many challenges or conditions and all that. Let the robot kind of figure out how to, deal with those things. If there's something falls in front of you, find a different path, right? And how do you know to find a different path? Try to look for the map or something, right? These are the things like solving problems and all that. And this is not unlike that, how we do the reasoning, because, you have given a task, but that task is like, how do you do that? So how do you kind of bake in this kind of reasoning process, and how does it learn, right? So I think we talk about, this reinforcement learning. It's based on feedback. So if you hit a rock, you fall down, the robot, don't do that next time. Try to pick it up and learn. So that's the reinforcement learning. And that's also the learning capability that is being used not only for robots, for the humanoid robots, but also for like autonomous driving, the car, when you see some obstacles in front, this is how based on huge amount of data. So going back to like the whole NVIDIA training and all that. So these are all like required as part of that process. So do not look at robots as a kind of standalone system that just like do one thing here. Behind it is actually AI that's powering that, particular. So I think this has become, again, a very foundational kind of driver going forward. While we see that, the NVIDIA chips is slowing down, data center and all this like US-China relationship, but there's a new set of all these opportunities that are coming out, right? Let's focus on that. And then we can actually circumvent a lot of these things and apply the technology with the geopolitical kind of like environment that, they're based on. So that's how we want to invest.
So
The
Darwin
question,
brings
I'm
up
sorry.
something that's.
You have a question?
I'm sorry. I
From
can't see
Brian
the
Alpha
end.
Partners, we're investors in Aptronic, Gecko Robotics, Shield AI, Rad AI, and so forth. We got all those deals from early stage investors like you, Darwin. And I think you're in exactly the right space. So I want to talk to you afterwards. However, challenge question. Since every founder,
can you turn your mic on? Your mic.
turn it on. Since every investor wants Sequoia or NEA or Andreessen to invest in their company as early as possible, how is it going to function for folks like you in a couple of years when Sequoia, Andreessen, and NEA can source every company using AI and get to them even before you do? How do you address that?
So actually, I think one of the slides that I present here, I think early stage VC, the game that you play is very different. It's not going to be just look at data sources. It's about relationship. So I mentioned that I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a founder. I have 20 years. Surf Robotics, the founder, actually is my co-worker 20 years ago. So yes, Andreessen can go talk to them. Sequoia can go talk to them. And by the way, yes, they did talk to them. And I think, instead the founder come talk to me because of the relationship that I have. And I think this is only one example. So as a competitive space, I think the question can be also rephrased as like, how do I compete with the Andreessen, Horowitz, or the Sequoia, right? So first of all, I don't compete with them. We can't, because they have how many $1 billion in the banks right now. I know we don't have that much. So we have to really find our niche. And I think I like what Alan mentioned, it's like, how do you pick this emerging managers, right? So we have our niche. Well, this niche is like, I'm a founder focused investor. I'm an engineer. Our team is scientists, doctors, and we have practical experiences. And we are on the ground. We know these people, and we understand the problem too. I mean, we talk about on the healthcare kind of like use cases, that because my partner, he's a ER physician. He ran into that problem just last week, and he saw that. And, if you talk to a senior partner that is sitting in his office in Silicon Valley sometime, it's like, okay, they might have heard about this thing called DeepSeek and all that. Some company is trying to do something. I don't think they have a deep understanding of how the application apply towards the industry, and that essentially we're boots on the ground. We understand it. We live what we do here, and I think we have this strong affinity towards founders that we understand the challenge is not about that check. It's also like the relationship behind it. And
So
that's how
the mammals win over the dinosaurs one more time.
So I've run 3 early stage VC funds. If your sole goal is to find the next Google, then maybe you should be giving Andreessen your money because they'll just invest in absolutely everything. To Darwin's point is, first of all, 50% or more of what you're investing in is management. That takes experience and knowledge to understand that the ability to execute on the idea is what you're investing in as much as anything else. Secondly, the opportunities to invest in successful businesses, excluding if you need an IPO or be the next Google, are infinite. The opportunities are so grand that we don't need to invest in everything. We just need to invest in a select group of businesses that are poised to be successful. That's all you need to do.
Darwin and Andy, what do you think are 2 or 3 best areas to be in 2025?
Can I just interject on something that Andy said, which is that something we learned from venture capital in the early 2000s was that trying to be the market actually didn't work. So trying to be the market, like a lot of VCs, they invested in so many funds, and it kind of violated portfolio management, which is that you want to have 10 to 15 companies that you're investing in, not hundreds, right? Well, it's very difficult to manage. You get dwindling return on managing the whole marketplace, right?
Marty,
So,
startups are your partners. They're not just investment vehicles.
exactly.
I was going to say, what are the 2 or 3 best areas that you would consider investing for this coming year or so? And what are 2 or 3 areas that you would stay away from? And what is sort of your target size for investments?
Okay, I go first. I guess, I think we mentioned healthcare is a strong focus for us. We simply see sort of the gap between the current market and also kind of the technology, what we can do here. So we see a lot of exciting deals that are coming out from medical imaging and precision medicine and drug discovery. These are the things that we felt that we have a direct impact towards the society, and obviously that translates into ultimate profits. I think that's why we want to look at that. And I shouldn't say it too loud. I would avoid crypto, but there's so many crypto folks here. I don't want to, so I mean, it's a way of investment, of course. We acknowledge that, but I think this is something where we tend to look at what is the ultimate impact towards the world. I think this is something where we're very interested in. Yeah.
Andy?
So first of all, I'll just double up on the healthcare example. I've been investing in healthcare for, I don't know, 35 years. And it's certainly poised to take good advantage of the DeepTech evolution, not revolution, that we're seing today.
Andy, can you speak up a little bit louder? We're having a hard time hearing.
I'm sorry, there's something, my microphone's right in front of me. The other side is that I think people in the audience should be looking at what they know and understand. There are so many existing businesses and industries that can benefit from the productivity gains from employing the technology that is more recently available to everyone. So the data is frequently there. It just has to be organized and trained. Looking for the sort of latest, greatest, newest business isn't necessarily the best investment. We're maybe looking for existing businesses that can make the most benefit from the evolutions that are there. Healthcare being one of them, as Darwin pointed out, but it's not the only one. So sure, you could invest in robotics. Darwin described how that might evolve, but there are tons and tons of businesses. Now, I've also been in the financial industry for a long time. I saw an article that, nobody will ever need to pick hedge fund managers ever again, AI will. I'm sorry, but I wouldn't personally put a dime into that. On the flip side is that if you looked at underlying analytical data, whether it's the loan market, whether it's the equity market, there's something called metadata. What is metadata? Metadata is not the price of securities going up and down. Algorithms have been trained on that for God knows how long. Metadata example would be you're looking at a company and you can now analyze the cell phone traffic related to the areas in which this company you're potentially investing in operates, and look at the trends in advance of their sales data. That's metadata, is looking at cell phone traffic as opposed to waiting for their sales data. So there are tremendous opportunities to be had in a number of industries, and there's some industries that simply won't benefit because there just isn't that much to be gained at the price. By the way, AI is not free. At the price of investing in the advances in productivity, and Darwin gave a great example of a warehouse where you can do that, and you can measure your results. Because when that thing makes mistakes, AI makes mistakes. When ChatGPT makes a mistake, you don't know it. But when that thing falls over and learns not to again, it learns. And that's a measurable result. So think of things that AI can be applied to in businesses where you can measure the error rate and you can measure the result. And then you'll be getting something out of it.
I think a great example of that is the new Samsung phones that actually translate live while you're talking. You talk to somebody in another country, they're speaking another language, and it translates what you're saying real time. But that's an application of AI inside of a business, right?
What would you say
Call
is the
centers
best
and
way
things of
for-
that nature benefit from
For
those.
family offices to get involved in these new investments and technologies? What's the best risk-adjusted way to get involved?
Can I answer that
Yeah.
question?
Yeah.
Hire Darwin. That's the way to do it.
Thank you.
Don't try and do this yourself. Hire
Did I
Darwin.
set that up okay?
Yeah, so I think, one thing I like, thank you for the shout out, that I think one important thing is that that I like to say is this VC game is not, people tend to categorize it as an asset class, but yes, it is an asset class, but you don't do as a kind of have that trading mentality comes in here and then say, okay, well, let's put it in there, and then hopefully 1 year it was like pop 20, 500% return and all that. That's not the right mentality to come in here. You have to have a longer horizon on these things. You're not just trying to being on the hop on the kind of like trend of the day. AI is a thing, and then quantum computing is next, and then okay, I want to do that. Always kind of keep that in mind, and I think that will serve you very well. So of course, you have the choice to invest in, you can invest in Sequoia and Andreessen Horowitz of the world. But like I mentioned, we have our own differentiation, and we have a track record to prove that already. So I think this is something we're very proud of.
So as a family office investor, and I'll give you a little different perspective. First of all, a fact: Andreessen Horowitz invested in literally every, because we're talking about every. They invested in every crypto startup there was. They no discerning between them. They invested in all of them. I don't even want to know what that portfolio looks like today. So that is not a solution for family office from my perspective. What family offices can do is invest in the people that they have confidence in, people that they understand. If you want to go invest in Sequoia, you don't need anything else. But by the way, Sequoia is a terrible example. They're the ones who invested in FTX, which was really a hedge fund trade, and VCs should never have been in it. And you notice there were no hedge funds in FTX. Then they had a bunch of people resign. And this is all just public information. It's not that I have anything knowledge. So Sequoia, maybe it's a good example, as well as a bad example. On the other hand, you want diversification. So find the smaller, more nimble, smart people that you can invest in. And by the way, we don't run funds anymore. We just co-invest with VCs. So we had a co-investment with a biotech fund that, like Darwin, was partnered with Eli Lilly. A family office couldn't replicate that partnership, so we invested in it as co-investors.
Do you take third-party investors, Andy, in those co-investments, or just all your own capital?
I couldn't hear the question. Sorry.
Andy, do you use co-investors outside of your circle?
We start with a circle because if we can't get, they're all SPVs and relationships with either a fund or a company. So we have to get it started, and then it depends what's there. In some cases, we'll look for other partners because we want smart people to be our investing partners, not just the people we know. So the answer is we start with who we've got and then work from there.
Well, fantastic. No, we're done. Great job, guys. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you.